Hey guys, PJ here. As promised, I'm doing my CyberGoat Showdown coverage based on the tournament that I held at the start of the month. I wanted to get this video out a lot sooner, but due to time constraints, that just didn't happen, but I'm here now. There will be another tournament coming at the very end of September, the 30th. Pushed it back just to make room for other DMera tournaments happening at the same time, as well as the YGO from Zero Chimera Tech tournament happening in the middle of. That'll happen in the middle of September. I'm getting my dates wrong. I meant September 30th, not August 30th. Anyway, we're gonna see how much of things have progressed from the YGO from Zero tournament and what are some of the prospects for the format going forward, and what to maybe expect for the next event. This was another tournament that Alefia topped in, using Warriors this time as opposed to the Stein Monarch list he took last time. And speaking of which, we can look at the deck type representation in comparison to the last event, which has dropped down drastically, which I understand because people may want to just veer towards the more competitive decks and strategies, and less likely doing a lot of the deck building and experimentation. And given also we have 17 players as opposed to 30 that this one had, as you can see. And based on the results, we had 5 players piloting Goat Control, 4 players on Warrior, 3 players on Stein Monarch, 2 players on Chaos Machine, 1 player on the Chaos Control, and 2 on other/rogue decks. And here are the individual lists themselves. As you can see, we got more of a triangle of the topping lists as opposed to the last event where we saw more things like Reason Gate Turbo and the Stein OTK, as well as some other unconventional strategies. Do I want to say that people are going to be exploring less decks going forward? No, because there are some things to consider. This is still relatively an underexplored format overall. We will see, we do have a lot of lists pertaining to other GX formats like Reaper and Chaos Return, where we're seeing Monarchs, we were seeing Warriors, so I understand people coming off the wheels of the future GX formats, well, the ones that were covered as a result of the YGO from Zero coverage. And without too much rambling, I'm just going to dive right into the lists themselves. First place, Alefia here on the Warrior strategy. Very consistent. He's done several different changes in comparison to previous Warrior decks. I'm just pulling up another one from Dean as an example of what people were typically piloting. Before it was the typical package of like the Blade Knights, Solemns, and of course the other things like Triple Death Shoot, and the lineup of the sideboard cards you typically see in Warrior decks for Goat format, and a little bit of Reaper. For Alefia, he's obviously geared more towards a Reaper style deck, and the highlight being the Triple DD Assailant. This was a carryover on that Reaper event. Oh, sorry, I don't have it up here right now, but having the DD Assailant was one of the highlights in my opinion as compared to the other Warrior decks I'd seen for the Cyber format. Considering Blade Knight kind of falls off here, there's less flip effect monsters for him to really target. You're likely dealing with Cyber Dragons smacking him over, just having 100 points higher than his typical 2000. And DD Assailant has a lot more niche in here, given that this format is a lot more battle phase structured. There's going to be a lot more things to it, a lot more monsters attacking, as opposed to, say, Go format and Chaos Turbo, where you're working with a lot more flip effect monsters and generating resources and card advantage. Here, it's a lot more aggressive because people are dropping Cyber Dragons. You got the Steins running around. looking to go for big pushes and wipe out the opponent. So DD Assailant works really well as an offense or a defense tool, whether you're crashing him into a Sidra or a Monarch to get him off the board, or whether you're clearing over just some of the other smaller monsters. And having that 1600 defense is super nice if you need to have it in defense position to block off some of these smaller monsters that might try to just hit over it, given like a tomato. And it's safe from interactions like Tsukuyomi that could just flip it down, wipe it out, which is something that Blade Knight is also very weak to. And by that logic, cards like Ninja Grandmaster and Mystic Swordsman. These cards do still have their place, I find, within this format, given you'll have to hit over defense position monsters, even if there's less things like GK Spy. MSL2 definitely to deal with the Dekoichis, to deal with the Faith, deal with Spirit Reapers. There's still going to be cards that your opponent wants to wall off, especially if they're on the Monarch strategy, and wanting to keep live monsters to set up their Monarch plays, and then last will, Stein, yada yada yada, blow 5k, destroy the opponent. You'll notice in Alefia's list that he's taken out the Solemn Judgments entirely. We talked about it after we had done the finals, which he made an impressive climb through in the lower bracket. And he talked about how much the Solemns might be hurting Warriors and other similar decks overall, given that you're possibly playing 4k to stop one power card, and your opponent could have another card lined up to come in, do a lot more damage, given there are a lot more things that are just going to punch you for over 2k, whether it's a Sidra, whether it's a Monarch, whether the opponent drops the BLS on your head, and so on and so forth. He did mention that they could have possibly been a side deck inclusion for the Solemns going forward. We talked about how he wouldn't completely outrule it, but for Warriors at least, Solemn becomes a lot more situational, as there's as many as you know, in formats a lot of power cards, it becomes a lot more situational, and there's a lot more risk as opposed to reward factor. Unlike in Reaper, where the resources and the amount of power has dropped drastically to a point where like you can be safe off of a couple of Solemns, even if it does put you pretty low. Now, side deck is pretty much what you'll see in a lot of side decks. Not to overgeneralize or anything, because there's still ways to weave in different cards and whatnot. King Tigers for dealing with Monarch setups. Mobius deals back row, floodgates, anything. You'll notice that several lists will have cards like Royal Decrees to block off trap cards like the Suckeritsu Armors or the Threatening Roars. So that's an important interaction and important to consider when watching player replays and seeing how they're setting up their back row. And speaking of Threatening Roars, this Mobius and King Tiger are the most common ones based on the results. But Alethea squeezed in a few tech cards for this like Bottomless Trapple, which obviously becomes more powerful as the game progresses, but here it's a little bit more niche. It's not going to work against every deck, and there are lots of cards like the True Nades, the Storms, there's still MST, and you see he's running a couple of Dust Tornadoes that Bottomless has a weakness to, or even like Cold Wave for the Monarchs. So it has its niche uses. It's more of a surprise factor, I feel, given that live cards are very important for Cyber, which is why we have lots of chainables or just a lot of generic removal options. An interesting note is the Magician of Fate sitting in here. This makes Magician of Faith does appear in a couple other lists just in general, not specifically for like the Go Controls decks. Being able to recur the Trinity or just any of their power cards is incredibly solid, considering we still have those 3 cards in the format, and the game, though it's not as much Trinity focused as say Go format, I say, it's still going to give you a huge boost as power drawing cards would, or free +1s. What makes the Magician of Faith interesting, without again rambling too much, I apologize if I'm kind of ranting or rambling, is she has a lot of interesting usage for the warriors, given players are likely to side out their noblemen of crossouts when going into the warrior matchup, so she can be a little bit of a surprise option to help bring back cards like the charity or the pod or whatever you need to recur. Anyway, that's Alefia's list in comparison to the other warrior lists. Not to say the warrior lists are bad, but Alefia has adapted to the format and taken this first place spot. Moving on, we're going to talk about Go Control, and this was Eratos. He was the runner-up of the event, but he dominated the winner's bracket, pushing right on the way to the finals, beating out 5 players. This list is, at least for the main deck, very similar to the list that Jazz brought in the YFC tournament. As you can kind of see, if I just... I'm going to just tab back and forth between the lists. The only thing that really changed between these two lists is the sideboard. I feel this is the most solid Go Control deck that we've seen thus far. Again, I don't think everything's 100% solved, but I think Jazz and Eratos have kind of figured out the main deck, running the triple Cyber Dragons, the triple Magician of Faith, the double Last Will, Scapegoats, as a Go Control deck would operate. And with Goat working a lot better in this format as opposed to, well, Goat format, is the amount of aggression you are dealing with typically. Getting the Scapegoats, even though they're going to have several natural weaknesses or cards to counter them, like the Xarian Universe, which is legal for this now finally, is very important to keep your life point threshold up, especially above 5,000, or just keep it up in case the opponent goes in for a Stein combo. Something to point out about some of the topping lists, kind of trend that I've seen, not just with Go Control, but with the top 3 here, and a couple other lists that popped up in the last event, is the use of, if we're on the list, is the double Book of Moon, which, yeah, has fallen off in Goat, given the dynamics are a lot different, but the utility of Book of Moon I'm finding to be extremely useful. Inherently, it does feel like a neg 1, but, well, putting aside that argument about whether it's a neg 1 or whatever, it's one of the most important combo or disruption pieces to have, I think, in this format. Being a quick play spell and being able to have a ton of interactions. If you need to reset a flip effect monster, book. If you need to turn off a floodgate like King Tiger or Kaiku, book. If you need to, let's say, do a priority check on the opponent dropping a Cyberstein or Tribe, book. Just the ability to get a monster face down, whether it's your own, whether it's the opponent's. It can circumvent whether a big push from your opponent, as I'm kind of reiterating on. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of the battle phase in this format and how important it is to survive such if one comes around, if one would come around and such. But I'm losing a bit of train of thought here. I'll bring it up again about Book of Moon, but I'm finding it's got a ton of utility in this format. Another example is just getting the Monarch down so you can clear over it, which, oh my god, it's going to be a neg 1. But trust me, I think seeing where the ratios on Book of Moon is something to look forward for those interested in playing in the next Cyber tournament. Now, moving on, I want to talk about this list here from Lolo, the Chaos Machine. This was a list that appeared also in the last YFZ event. Here, put them next to each other. Lolo has gotten into the top 3 twice now using this very similar list with the Chaos Machine strategy. Now, is it more chaos? Is it more strategy? It's debatable. That's very debatable. I'd say it's more machine-oriented. The Chaos Engine does work because Cyber Dragons are lights and a lot of the other monsters are dark. He is working with the multiple Magician of Fates, as I mentioned before, and the double books for resetting things like the Koichi, or you can be cheeky, flip down your Fusilier Dragon to reset its effect and actually get the full power. I'm not saying that's the I'm not saying that's a core component. That's just a little trick you can do. Right, in comparison to the last event, he's cut the Blowback Dragon in favor of a Sinister Serpent. Very interesting choice. For the most part, his main deck remains relatively unchanged. The sideboard has changed around from the last time. He's taken out the Karibos and in place added the Royal Decrees. This is likely to help with the pushes, making sure that Threatening Roar is not doing things like shutting down the limiter removal plays, and possibly not getting Torrential or Mirror Force is really nice. We do see Jinzo pop up in several sideboards. We're still a bit on the fence of whether Jinzo can be fully useful or not. I think it's situational, even though it feels like with all the machines and triple limiter removal that Jinzo is like a go-to card. It's, for one, there's not a lot of trap cards in general for him to counter, and B, a lot of these traps like Trap Dust Shoot and Threatening Roar are going to happen before he kind of hits the board in most cases, so it's still kind of up to debate whether he's very useful or not. We'll have to see going into the future with more people weaving him in and out of the main and side deck. A lot of this engine does have a lot. It seems like a very aggressive list, but there's a lot like interaction with resource, with retaining or gaining resources with the Dekoichis and the Magician of Fates. You want to pulling out the limiter removals from the deck quickly, or even just some of your core combo pieces like the Chaos Sorcerer and BLS. There's a bit of the turbo strategy coming in, which by the way, as you can see, there's not in this event or really in the YFZ event. I don't think. I'm just going to check quickly. That's one thing I wanted to mention was the kind of lack of Chaos Turbo here. And it makes for an interesting discussion of whether is Chaos Turbo, the typical Chaos Turbo that we see in good format, is that better? Is it really weak? Is it just bad here, or is it just has not been tested? My stance is that it's been unproven. All the pieces are still there to make it work, but I'm wondering if it has kind of drastically fallen off with the addition of cards like Cyber Dragon, being able to hit over things like GK Spy, and with format being a little bit more faster paced and more aggressive. I'm not sure how good Chaos Turbo actually is, but one prospect I have going forward is if Chaos Turbo does still have the power that it does here, or if it truly has fallen off. Again, we haven't seen anybody take it to the events, so we will have to wait and see if someone brings it for CyberGoat Showdown 2 or just much further on. And now we're going to talk about the deck that many people have feared, or kind of the boogeyman of this format and similar GX formats, is the Stein Monarch deck, the deck with the really nasty kill combo. I will also bring up Jim Bob's list here for reference, although this is the deck list that Alefia won with in the YFZ tournament here. I just want to do a quick comparison between the two lists. These were the two, well, there was one list from BSOX, sorry, but just for the sake of this comparison, I'm going to be talking about what Dump Truck did as opposed to what Dump Truck did with his list as opposed to what was used in the last event. Not to say one is better than the other. Dump Truck made some interesting changes. For the Stein Monarch list, he's taken out one Zaborg in favor of one Magician of Faith, which is I thought was kind of interesting. As you guys may know, I mean, Kari goes out saying the Monarch has the weakness of bricking, and in a format where you do want lives cards on the board, you really want to have active cards that you can use. Again, I'm kind of rehashing what people already know. But having extra Magician of Faith is really cool, given you're, as I mentioned before, you're still playing around the Trinity. You want access to these high power resource cards, and B, if you need to recur another Cold Wave, or you need to recur the other Brain Control, or if you need to just recover the last will that you potentially lost. You notice on the Monarch list, it might be thinking like, well, don't I want to run multiple like last wills just to have that combo live? Again, last will I think is something that can be stuck in your hand. You may not get full value out of it. So this list has been optimized in a way to be successful. So we assume for now just one last will is the way to go. But having the extra Magician of Faith can help recur that resource should you ever lose it via like a Delinquent Duo or Don Zalug. In comparison to the last list, which still ran the triples of Borg, it's still a really strong list, but I just wanted to show the dynamics between the two decks. Dump has opted to run an extra Cyber Dragon in the sideboard, the extra Kaiku. He's not running the Bottomless Trap Hole like Alephia / Jim Bob is, but he is taking in the double Waboku possibly for going second or going against the OTK strategies, or though they didn't come up, the Stein OTK are like RGT decks that emerged. You'll notice about the Stein list, in comparison to the other decks, they're only running one Nobleman Cross out. I feel it's to keep it's not the worst thing in the world to keep an opponent's set monster in the board, given you do want setup for your side draw, and the board can naturally just clear any defense out of the way. I think this will be kind of the standard, whether you mess around with the ratios or not, whatever you want to do with the ratios is kind of the standard for Stein Monarch going into the future, unless there's a little more innovation or people find some other tools to make Stein Monarch more scary than it already is. It's a deck that's already topped 2 events of, I know, a small number of events from the past, but I still think this deck will be a menace, even with more sideboard hate coming in, and even a format with 2 to 3 Dust Shoot. And that's something I did want to mention. The 2 most common cards that emerged in the format / the main decks is the Trap Dust Shoot and Cyber Dragon. I think any deck that wants to innovate, or any like new strategies that want to emerge, or anyone who is going to add tech, has to consider these 2 cards above all else. I know Knock is kind of creeping up there, but some lists are on 2, some lists are 1. Any deck has to be prepared for the multiples of Dust Shoot and the multiples of Cyber Dragon. Very important that deck has to be able to play with just 1 less monster in the hand. It begs the question of whether it's better to run a higher monster lineup, like for example Lefia did with his Warriors, or is it better to maybe run a lower monster count and not risk having a card shuffled back into the deck. And of course, like considering Cyber Dragon when approaching the board, it has just an incredible amount of utility for any of these decks coming in, except for maybe if you're doing something a lot more unconventional. I think the spiciest deck of this format that emerged was the Final Countdown deck that Claudia brought. I'm probably like you guys. I 1000% did not expect to see a Final Countdown deck in a Cyber format tournament, but here we are in the Twilight Zone. I do give the player Claudia, I give him praise for taking on this challenge of bringing like a kind of a rogue deck, or like a rogue or jank deck into this event. I'm not going to entirely dismiss it, just be like, oh, it's a meme deck, because there are some interesting things going on. He has adapted to the battle phase aspect of this format and has run almost anything you can to skip the battle phase. You see like Frozen Soul, Thunders of Rulers. So the deck had a bit of momentum in some situations, especially when you had all the scapegoats and Spear Reapers sitting out on the board. We can see kind of why like Reaper became such a prominent card going from Goat format into Reaper and Chaos Return. Kind of like how I talked about DD Assailant having the offense and defense aspect, requiring a little bit more work to remove, and also having that weird targeting interaction may actually be a perk in some situations. It was very interesting to see this deck. Obviously, it didn't progress too far in the bracket, but I'm surprised it kind of got the results that it did. It's hard to really classify a deck like this in any kind of like tier list. Should one come in the future, I'd like to do a tier list for this format when we get more action happening. Just given that given that the deck is just built so much completely different from everything else and has that weird alt win con. But again, I just wanted to feature the spiciest deck of the format because I too like to see the spice factor. I do like to see the tech cards coming out and the rogue strats emerge. Even if I do think a lot of these events are going to be streamlined going into CyberGoat Showdown 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 27 or whatever. And now that we're here, we've kind of seen some of the top lists. I want to look at some of the tech cards that emerged in some players' lists. I thought it was interesting to see some players trying out Air Knight Parshath here. This is obviously a card that, talking about Goat format again, has fallen off due to the GK Spy nonsense. But given the amount of, not just scapegoats running around, but like set Magician of Fates or set Dekoichis, or just other cards you could hit over, Parshath has some value. I'm not going to say it's secretly a tier 1 card, but it has a little bit of niche here as opposed to summoning a Monarch, given that A, you're crashing over a defense position monster like Reaper, and B, just the drawing aspect and getting to 1 card sooner. Parshath is something that can be tested out a little more, I feel. I get to decide whether this card's ultimately trash or it's secretly a treasure. So that's up for you guys, the players, to go and figure out. But pretty cool to see some different tech cards from other players, even if it didn't ultimately result in them getting into the top cut. GYFS here with the library was interesting to see an event. It's not my not my favorite deck in the world, but whose it is. But very interesting since library still has all its tools, all things it needs to work. Again, kind of like the Final Countdown deck, this is just an unclassified deck when it comes to rankings, just because you either have the combo or you don't. He did only play 1 game with the library FTK. He did brick and ultimately he got O2'd, but very interesting to have library pop up even outside of Goat format and going into other GX formats. So be very wary. There's still some players dedicated to bringing FTK decks, and I wanted to mention not just because bringing up library FTK, but be prepared for other FTK decks to emerge in future events, whether it's economics, and even the newly released well, I want to say new because this format's like this set's like almost 20 years old. This format does have magical explosions, so players might be looking to engineer an FTK out of that. Without too much rambling again, I want to say that FTK decks can emerge in this format. It's degenerate, it sucks when it happens. And I know sometimes they just fall on their face, but it may be worth keeping an eye out for when people join in on the event. Join in on the future events, sorry. One last list I wanted to look at was JCVD's take on Goat Control. JCVD is a very prolific GOAT/Chaos Control player within the GOAT format scene. He's appeared multiple times in the FLCs and all the, again, GOAT events. He's got his signature card, the Dark Magician of Chaos. I'm not too sure about this card outside of the RGT strategies or any decks that are involving like a return from different dimension or dimension fusion style deck. There's obviously some room for it to work in GOAT, but it can be difficult to actually generate a 2 tribute monster or to just simply get him on the board time, giving GOAT format a lot slower pace. But I do trust JCVD to know what he's doing, given that he's not just in GOAT, but he's played in other GX era formats. He recently got a top 3, top 4 within the Stein format tournament on the YFC tournament. And I hope he comes back for the next few events. He didn't have he unfortunately had a bit of a shoddy run in this event. JCVD, if you're watching, I hope you come back. Hope you experiment more with Dark Magician of Chaos or the traditional way that you'd kind of build the build GOAT control or Chaos control. And yeah, it's nice to see players not just from the YFC server come in, but other players from the GOAT format circuit give this format a shot, given we are so close to it, and given there is some potential to grow the format going into the next few events. And I'm really looking forward to the second tournament to see possibly some more deck representation, more card representation. It might happen, might not happen. It's up to the players whether they want to continue to progress the best decks in the format or they want to spark a little more innovation. One deck that hasn't been showing up that I think has some potential is the classic burn deck, and I'm doing this more akin to the Panda burn that you would see in GOAT format. I know there's more to consider given Cyber Dragons, but with Stein being kind of an omnipotent threat, I'm surprised we haven't got a little bit more of this like traditional burn package within some of these within the fast few tournaments. Given Stein is naturally going to have a problem with big blowout burn cards like Just Desserts, like Secret Barrel. Yakugair Panda is a natural counter to the Scapegoat tokens and things like Spirit Reaper. Cards like Big Shield Gardna can actually wall off the Cyber Dragon properly, and because there's double knocks running around, he can do a knock block, if that's even a term. I could just be making shit up. And Fairy Lily too. Actually, we did have, now that I mention it, sorry, ADHD moment. We had a player actually bring Injection Fairy Lily into a GOAT control list. She has appeared in some control lists for GOAT format, but she could work relatively decently. If players want to try squeezing her into a main or side list as a tech, or if she just has potential as a card in general, given that if she takes a shot at a player's life points, it like automatically put them out of Stein range. Obviously, like we've seen her in DM formats, she can be like a double-edged sword, paying 2k to have a 3,400 attack monster in the damage step. Though she might have problems with cards like Karibo, which, now that I mention it's not, I don't think it's too common of an interaction. Karibo may be cited for specifically OTK. But I'm rambling. It's my first time doing this video. It's going to be a lot of rambling. These will get better, I promise. Look out for the card that can do a huge chunk of damage within one attack. And there might be more of those that can slip into this format. Where was I? talking about burn, and cards like Chain Energy, cards like the Nightmare Wheels. These are the burn strategies I think can creep into cyber format and do well. Like I mentioned, punishing, making either the Cybersteins dead or punishing any of these Cyberstein plays, but they could have an issue with the Royal Decrees being a common side card and people slipping Jinzo in and out. But again, uh, I'd say this is unproven as we speak. Anyway, to kind of just recap everything, Warriors have made a boost forward. Go Control is proving to be consistent. RGT and Steiner's Ks have kind of fallen off, or they're fallen off, or they've kind of disappeared. We didn't really see them in this event. There is some little bit of room for lockdown nifty Ks to, I wouldn't say like become tier 1. It's gonna be like really hard that's gonna be a challenge, probably an impossible challenge, but there's room for all WinCon FTKs to sneak in and take some win, and not like, maybe not win events, but sneak in, like take players by surprise. And there's decks like Chaos Turbo and Panda Burn, or other variants of Burn that can sneak in and have some surprising success. That's my video for now. Thank you for watching and putting up with my rambling and some of my more awkward moments, but I really wanted to do this video. It was kind of hard doing the first of its kind, but I promise these will get better. I do want to keep supporting this format. I think it's fun. I think it's dynamic. I think it pushes GOAT format out of its Chaos Turbo shell a little bit. And I hope whoever's watching to come and join the next Cyber GOAT Showdown tournament happening September 30th, which will be on the Discord, which I will link into the video below. That's all for now, guys. Thank you for watching. Have an excellent day.